The water in the trough reflected her face back at her with perfect clarity under the blazing Nevada sun, and that was when she started speaking to herself again, her voice barely above a whisper as she said those words that had become a prayer of sorts in her lonely existence. "Sometimes I'm my only company," Thea Sullivan murmured to her reflection, watching the ripples distort her image as a hot breeze swept across the dusty yard behind the Hawthorne General Store where she worked. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins during the afternoon rush, and sweat dampened her collar despite the shade provided by the building's overhang. It was August of 1883, and the heat seemed to press down on everything with relentless determination. She did not hear the footsteps approaching from behind, too lost in her own thoughts and the strange comfort she found in addressing her reflection. The loneliness had become such a constant companion over the past 3 years since she had arrived in Hawthorne that she had started these one-sided conversations as a way to maintain her sanity. At 22 years old, she had expected more from life than measuring out flour and sugar for miners and ranch hands while living in a cramped room above the store. Samuel Griffin stood frozen behind the corner of the building, his dusty boots planted in the hard-packed earth as he listened to her soft voice talking to the water. He had ridden into town that afternoon with a string of horses he planned to sell, his saddlebags heavy with 3 months' worth of pay from driving cattle up from Arizona territory. The sound of her voice speaking to no one had stopped him in his tracks, and something about the profound sadness in those words made his chest tighten in a way he had not experienced in his 25 years. He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle her, but feeling like an intruder on an intensely private moment. Thea spun around so quickly that her skirts kicked up a small cloud of dust, her hand flying to her throat as color flooded her cheeks. "I apologize, miss," Samuel said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "I did not mean to sneak up on you. I was looking for the back entrance to the store." Thea straightened her spine, trying to recover her dignity even as mortification burned through her. "The store is closed for the day," she said, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. "We open again at 7 tomorrow morning." Samuel nodded slowly, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to turn away. He was tall and lean, with the sun-weathered skin of someone who spent his life outdoors and the easy stance of a man comfortable in his own body. Dust covered his clothes, and the stubble on his jaw suggested several days without a proper shave. "I understand," he said quietly. "I just needed some supplies before heading out to the ranch I'm working at, but tomorrow morning will do just fine." He started to turn away, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way her green eyes held a depth of loneliness that matched what he heard in her voice, or maybe it was simply that he recognized a kindred spirit. He had spent most of his adult life drifting from job to job, ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "If you do not mind my saying," Samuel ventured, turning back to face her, "a woman who looks like you should not have to rely on her reflection for company." Thea's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You have no idea about my circumstances, Mr. Griffin." Samuel Griffin. He took a step closer, holding his hat against his chest. "And you are right, I do not know your circumstances, but I know loneliness when I see it. And I know it takes a particular kind of isolation to make a person seek conversation with their own reflection." The fight went out of Thea's posture, her shoulders sagging slightly as she looked away from his penetrating gaze. "I should go inside. Mr. Patterson will be wondering where I've gotten to." "Is Mr. Patterson your husband?" Samuel asked, the question coming out before he could stop himself. "He is my employer," Thea replied, a bitter note creeping into her voice. "I work in his store, live in his building, and exist in his employment, but no, he is not my husband. Mr. Patterson is 63 years old and has been a widower for the past decade." Samuel felt relief wash through him, which was foolish considering he had known this woman for all of 5 minutes. "Would you allow me to buy you supper tomorrow evening, Miss Sullivan, Thea Sullivan?" She studied him carefully, weighing the offer against the warnings that had been drilled into her since childhood about strange men and improper behavior. But there was something in his face that spoke of genuine kindness rather than the leering interest she had grown accustomed to from some of the men who frequented the store. "I do not accept social invitations from men I do not know," she finally said, but her voice had softened. "Then perhaps you could get to know me," Samuel suggested. "I will be in town for at least a week, maybe longer depending on how the horse sales go. I could stop by the store each day and we could talk. Nothing improper, just conversation during business hours where everything is respectable and proper." Thea found herself nodding before her rational mind could intervene. "I suppose there would be no harm in that. But I should warn you, Mr. Griffin, I am not looking for romantic entanglement. My life is complicated enough without adding that particular burden." Samuel smiled for the first time, and it transformed his entire face from stern to genuinely warm. "I am not looking for complications either, Miss Sullivan. Just conversation with someone who understands what it means to feel alone even when surrounded by people." That night, Thea lay in her narrow bed in the stifling room above the store and wondered what madness had possessed her to agree to such an arrangement. She had built careful walls around herself since arriving in Hawthorne, keeping the townspeople at a friendly but distant relationship. She worked hard, attended church services on Sundays, and kept her personal life entirely private. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a drifting cowboy who would inevitably move on to the next job, the next town, the next chapter of his wandering life. But when Samuel walked through the store's front door at 8 o'clock the next morning, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes that still could not quite hide the essential ruggedness of his nature, her heart did a foolish little skip that she tried desperately to ignore. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the store despite the presence of 3 other customers browsing the shelves. "Good morning, Mr. Griffin," Thea replied, forcing her attention back to the elderly woman she was helping select thread. "I will be with you in just a moment." Samuel nodded and wandered toward the back of the store, examining the goods with apparent interest, though Thea suspected he was simply giving her time to finish with her customer. True to his word, he waited patiently until she was free before approaching the counter with a short list of supplies. As she measured out coffee beans and wrapped them in brown paper, he leaned against the counter and spoke in a voice low enough that it would not carry to the other customers. "I sold 3 horses this morning," he said. "Got a fair price too, which does not always happen in these small towns. The buyer was a rancher named Morrison who owns spread about 10 miles north of here." "The Morrison Ranch," Thea confirmed, her hands steady as she worked. "They run cattle mostly, but they breed some fine horses too. Mr. Morrison comes in every Saturday for supplies." "Do you know everyone in town, Miss Sullivan?" "It is a small town, Mr. Griffin. There are perhaps 200 people living in Hawthorne proper, and maybe another 100 scattered on the surrounding ranches and mining claims. After 3 years, yes, I know most everyone." Samuel watched her efficient movements, noting the grace in her hands despite the mundane task. "What brought you to Hawthorne 3 years ago?" Thea's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. The same thing that brings most people to Nevada: the need for a fresh start and the hope that the West offers more opportunity than the East. "You are from back east originally?" "Pennsylvania," Thea said, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. "Philadelphia, to be specific. I came out here with my father in 1880, just after my 19th birthday. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. Instead, he struck a vein of quartz that collapsed on him 6 months after we arrived." The pain in her voice was raw despite the 3 years that had passed, and Samuel felt his own heart ache in sympathy. "I am truly sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Thea said quietly, finishing his package and tallying the cost. "That will be $1.35. Samuel counted out the coins and placed them on the counter, his fingers accidentally brushing hers as she swept them into her palm. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a spark of awareness through both of them that was impossible to ignore. "Would you tell me more about Philadelphia?" Samuel asked. "I have never been further east than St. Louis." Over the next hour, between helping other customers, Thea found herself sharing details about her childhood that she had not spoken of in years. She told him about the narrow brick row house where she had grown up, the daughter of a factory foreman and a seamstress mother who had died of influenza when Thea was 16. She described the crowded streets, the constant noise and motion of city life, and how her father had grown increasingly desperate after her mother's death, convinced that their salvation lay in the opportunities promised by the West. Samuel listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing some of his own history in turn. He had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. When his parents died within a year of each other, the ranch had gone to his oldest brother, and Samuel had found himself at loose ends. He had been drifting ever since, working as a cowhand, horsebreaker, occasional scout, and general laborer on various ranches and cattle drives throughout Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona territories. "So you see," Samuel said, with a self-deprecating smile, "I am not exactly prime husband material. No land, no permanent home, just whatever I can carry in my saddlebags and the skills in my hands." "Yet you seem content with that life," Thea observed, noting how his eyes lit up when he talked about being on the trail, sleeping under stars, and working with horses. "Content might be too strong a word," Samuel admitted, "but I have not found a reason to settle down yet. Every place starts to feel confining after a while, and I get the urge to see what is over the next horizon." Something in Thea's expression shifted, a wall going back up that Samuel could almost see being constructed. "Then we are very different, Mr. Griffin. I have had quite enough of wandering and uncertainty. What I want more than anything is stability, a place to call my own, and the security of knowing where I will be from one season to the next." "Those are not bad things to want," Samuel said carefully, sensing he had somehow damaged the tentative connection they were building, "but they do not have to mean being alone." Thea busied herself straightening items on the counter that did not need straightening. "Perhaps not, but they do require careful planning and practical thinking, neither of which are served by forming attachments to men who will inevitably ride off into the sunset when the mood strikes them." The words stung, even though Samuel knew they were fair. He had no right to feel wounded by such an accurate assessment of his character and lifestyle, yet something about Thea Sullivan made him want to be different. Made him wonder if maybe settling down would not feel like confinement if it was with the right person. "You are right," he said quietly. "I should not take up any more of your time with idle conversation. Thank you for the supplies, Miss Sullivan." He gathered his packages and headed toward the door, but paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it is worth, I think any man would be fortunate to provide you with the stability and security you deserve. I hope you find exactly what you are looking for." After he left, Thea stood behind the counter, feeling hollowed out in a way she could not quite explain. She had said the right things, protected herself from inevitable hurt, and maintained the careful boundaries she had established. So why did it feel like she had just made a terrible mistake? For the next 3 days, Samuel did not return to the store. Thea told herself she was relieved, that it was better this way, that she had successfully avoided a painful entanglement. But she found herself looking up every time the door opened, hoping to see his tall frame and gray eyes. She caught herself listening for his voice among the various customers and hated that she had become the kind of woman who pined after a man she barely knew. On the 4th day, she saw him from the store window, leading a magnificent black stallion down the main street toward the livery stable. He was laughing at something the man walking beside him had said, and the sound carried through the afternoon air like music. Thea's hands tightened on the windowsill as she watched him disappear into the stable, telling herself firmly that she had no right to feel this crushing disappointment. That evening, after the store closed, she found herself once again standing by the water trough, looking at her reflection in the failing light. "You are a fool, Thea Sullivan," she told her wavering image. "You finally meet someone who seems to understand your loneliness, and you push him away because you are too frightened to take a risk. I am starting to think that Water Trough provides better conversation than most saloons." Thea spun around to find Samuel standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands, and an uncertain expression on his face. How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to hear you call yourself a fool," Samuel said, taking a few steps closer. "Which I disagree with, by the way. You were being practical and protecting yourself. Those are signs of wisdom, not foolishness." "Then why do I feel so foolish?" Thea asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. Samuel closed the remaining distance between them until only a few feet separated them. "Maybe because wisdom and happiness do not always align. Maybe because sometimes the practical choice and the right choice are not the same thing." "You said you would be in town for a week," Thea said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It has only been 4 days. Why have you not been by the store?" "Because you made it clear that you were not interested in pursuing any kind of friendship with a drifter like me," Samuel replied honestly. "I was trying to respect your wishes, even though staying away from you has been considerably more difficult than I expected." Thea's breath caught in her throat. "You have known me for less than a week. How can you possibly feel anything beyond passing interest?" "I could ask you the same question," Samuel said softly. "You are the one standing here talking to your reflection about feeling foolish. You are the one who has been watching for me these past few days. Do not deny it, because Mrs. Patterson mentioned to her husband, who mentioned to Morrison, who mentioned to me that the pretty clerk at the general store seemed distracted lately." Heat flooded Thea's cheeks. "The entire town is gossiping about me?" "The entire town is hoping to see a lonely young woman find some happiness," Samuel corrected. "There is a difference." Thea turned away, hugging her arms around herself as the evening breeze kicked up small dust devils in the yard. "I cannot afford to hope for things that are impossible. Hope is a luxury for people who have safety nets and second chances. I have neither." Samuel moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling air. "What happened to make you so afraid of taking chances?" The question hung between them for a long moment before Thea finally spoke. "My father was a dreamer. He chased hope all the way from Philadelphia to Nevada, convinced that everything would work out if he just believed hard enough. And where did it get him? Buried in an unmarked grave because I could not even afford a proper headstone. Where did it get me? Working 12-hour days in a general store, living in a room barely big enough to turn around in, with no prospects and no future beyond measuring out flour and making polite conversation with customers. That is not the whole truth, though, is it?" Samuel said gently. "You are not just afraid of ending up like your father. You are afraid of ending up like your mother." Thea's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with shock. "What do you mean?" "You said your mother died when you were 16. I would wager she spent her whole life taking care of others, making sacrifices, putting her own dreams aside, and in the end, she died young without ever getting to live for herself." Samuel's voice was quiet but certain. "You are afraid that if you let yourself care about someone, if you attach your life to another person's dreams, you will disappear the same way she did." Tears burned in Thea's eyes because he was right. More right than she wanted to admit. "My mother was a good woman who deserved better than she got. She sewed piecework until her fingers bled, kept our home clean and welcoming, and never once complained about the life she had. But I saw the sadness in her eyes sometimes, saw the way she would stare out the window like she was looking for something she had lost long ago." "And you do not want that life," Samuel said. It was not a question. "No," Thea whispered. "I do not want that life. I want to matter. I want to have something that is mine. I want to be more than just someone's wife or daughter or employee." Samuel nodded slowly, processing her words. "Those are good things to want, Thea, but they do not have to be mutually exclusive with letting someone into your life. The right person would not ask you to diminish yourself. They would want to see you grow and flourish." "And you think you are that person?" Thea asked, a challenge in her voice even as tears tracked down her cheeks. "I do not know," Samuel admitted, "but I would like the chance to find out. I would like the chance to know you, really know you, without either of us running scared from what we might feel." Thea wiped at her tears with shaking hands. I do not know how to do this. I have never let anyone get close since my father died. I do not know how to be anything other than alone. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to step away, and gently took one of her hands in his. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, warm and solid against her much smaller hand. "Neither do I," he said. "I have been drifting for so long that I have forgotten what it feels like to have roots, but maybe we could figure it out together." "You would get bored," Thea said, but her hand remained in his. "You said yourself that you get restless, that every place starts to feel confining." "Maybe I have been restless because I was looking for something without knowing what it was," Samuel suggested. "Maybe some people are not meant to wander forever. Maybe some of us just need the right reason to stay in one place." Thea wanted to believe him, wanted to take the leap of faith that his words invited. But 3 years of carefully constructed self-protection could not be dismantled in a single conversation, no matter how much her heart urged her to try. "I need time," she finally said. "I need to think about this without you standing here making me feel things I am not ready to feel." Samuel nodded and released her hand, though she could see the disappointment flash across his face. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I told Morrison I would work on his ranch for at least a month, so I will be around Hawthorne for a while. When you are ready to talk, you know where to find me." He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "For what it is worth, Thea, I do not think you give yourself enough credit. You survived losing your mother, losing your father, and finding yourself alone in a rough frontier town. You built a life from nothing, and you did it without compromising your principles or your dignity. That takes incredible strength. You are already so much more than just someone's anything. You are fully yourself, and that is remarkable." Then he was gone, walking into the gathering darkness while Thea stood frozen by the water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked down at her reflection one more time, but this time she did not speak. There was nothing left to say to that wavering image because all the important words needed to be said to the man who had just walked away. Sleep eluded Thea that night as she lay in her sweltering room, replaying every conversation she had shared with Samuel Griffin. The practical part of her brain listed all the reasons why pursuing anything with him was foolish. He was a drifter with no permanent home. She barely knew him. He could be lying about his character or intentions. She would be risking the fragile stability she had fought so hard to achieve. But another part of her, a part that had been silent for so long she had almost forgotten it existed, whispered different truths. He made her laugh. He listened when she talked. He saw past her carefully maintained walls to the lonely, frightened woman beneath. He made her feel less alone than she had felt in 3 years. And that was worth something, was it not? When dawn finally broke, Thea rose with gritty eyes and a resolution forming in her chest. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes, and pinned her hair with extra care. Then she went downstairs to open the store as usual, her heart in her throat every time the door opened. But Samuel did not come that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, Thea swallowed her pride and asked Mr. Patterson if he knew how she might get a message out to the Morrison ranch. The older man's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Young Griffin finally wore down your defenses, did he? I wondered how long you would hold out. He seems like a good man, Thea. Better than most who pass through here." "I just need to speak with him," Thea said, color rising in her cheeks. "That is all." "Morrison's foreman comes in every Friday afternoon for supplies," Mr. Patterson said. "That is tomorrow. You could send a note with him if you like." Thea nodded, relief flooding through her. "Thank you. That would be perfect." That evening she sat at the small table in her room with a piece of precious writing paper and struggled to find the right words. Everything she wrote sounded either too forward or too cold, too desperate or too distant. Finally, she settled on simple honesty. "Mr. Griffin," she wrote in her careful script, I have given considerable thought to our last conversation, and I would very much like to speak with you again at your earliest convenience. If you are available this Sunday after church services, perhaps we could take a walk along the creek north of town. I believe I owe you an apology for my harsh words, and perhaps a chance for us both to speak more openly. Respectfully, Miss Thea Sullivan. She sealed the note and took it downstairs to give to Mr. Patterson, who promised to pass it along to Morrison's foreman the following afternoon. Then there was nothing to do but wait and wonder if Samuel would respond, or if she had already pushed him too far away. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot, the August sun already beating down fiercely by the time Thea walked to the small church that served Hawthorne's Protestant population. She wore her best dress, a dove-gray cotton with simple white trim, and carried her mother's old Bible that had traveled with her from Philadelphia. As she entered the small wooden building, her eyes immediately scanned the congregation for Samuel's familiar form. He was sitting in the back pew, freshly shaved, and wearing clean clothes that marked him as a working cowboy trying to be respectful in church. When their eyes met, he stood immediately and made his way to where she stood uncertainly in the aisle. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan," he said quietly, mindful of the other parishioners settling into their seats. "I got your note. I would be honored to walk with you after services." Relief nearly made Thea's knees buckle. "Thank you for coming to town. I know it must be a long ride from the Morrison place." 13 miles, Samuel confirmed, "but I would have ridden twice that distance for the chance to speak with you again." They sat together during the service, sharing a hymnal, though both of them already knew the words to the old songs by heart. Thea was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the solid warmth of his shoulder occasionally brushing hers in the crowded pew, the deep timbre of his voice joining hers in song. Several of the town's older women noticed their proximity and exchanged meaningful glances, but Thea found she did not care about the gossip for once. After the service ended, they walked together toward the creek that ran along the northern edge of town, following a well-worn path through the scrub brush and scattered cottonwood trees. The creek itself was not much more than a trickle this late in summer, but the trees provided blessed shade from the relentless sun. "I owe you an apology," Thea began, once they were out of earshot of the other churchgoers. "I was unnecessarily harsh the other evening. You have been nothing but kind to me, and I responded by essentially calling you an unreliable drifter." "You were protecting yourself," Samuel said, his eyes on the path ahead. "There is no need to apologize for that." "But there is," Thea insisted. "I judged you based on my own fears rather than on your actual character. That was unfair and unkind." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Thea, you were not entirely wrong. I am a drifter. I do not have land or property or even a permanent job. Everything you said about me was factually accurate." "But not necessarily predictive of the future," Thea argued. "Just because you have been drifting does not mean you always will. People can change their circumstances if they have sufficient motivation." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. "And would I be correct in assuming that you might be willing to provide such motivation?" Thea felt heat rise to her cheeks, but forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. "I would be lying if I said I had not thought about it. You have occupied my thoughts considerably more than is probably proper for such a short acquaintance." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Samuel assured her. "In fact, I have been giving serious thought to Morrison's offer to keep me on permanently as his head horse trainer. It would mean steady work, decent pay, and a place to stay on the ranch. It would not be land of my own, but it would be stability." Thea's heart leaped at his words, but she forced herself to speak cautiously. "You should not make such a significant decision based on a woman you have known for less than 2 weeks, Samuel. What if things do not work out between us? You would be stuck in a job you might not want, in a place you might not wish to stay." "That is a risk I am willing to take," Samuel said, reaching out to take her hand, "because the alternative, riding away from you and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been, is infinitely worse. At least if I stay and we try to build something together, I will know for certain one way or the other." Thea looked down at their joined hands. his so much larger and darker than hers, calloused from hard work but gentle in their grip. "I am frightened," she admitted quietly. "I am frightened of hoping for something and having it ripped away again. I am frightened of losing myself in someone else's dreams. I am frightened of ending up like my mother, used up and worn down by a hard life." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "I cannot promise that life will be easy if we choose to walk this path together. But I can promise that I will never ask you to diminish yourself for my sake. I can promise to listen when you speak and value your dreams as much as my own. I can promise to work hard to build something stable and lasting, not just for me, but for us together." "And what about children?" Thea asked, forcing herself to voice one of her deepest fears. "What about the risk that I could end up like my mother, dying young and leaving children motherless?" "That is a fear every woman faces when she considers marriage and family," Samuel said seriously. "But Thea, life itself is a risk. You could work yourself to exhaustion in that general store and die young anyway. At least if we build a life together, you would have spent your years surrounded by love and partnership rather than isolation." Thea knew he was right, but the fear that had kept her safe for so long was hard to release. "I need more time," she said finally. "Not because I do not care for you, but because I need to be certain that I'm choosing this for the right reasons. I need to be certain that I'm not just grasping at you because I am lonely." "Take all the time you need," Samuel said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I will be at Morrison's ranch, training horses and saving my pay. When you are ready, you know where to find me." He started to release her hand, but Thea tightened her grip. "Could we continue these Sunday walks? Could we spend time together and get to know each other properly before making any permanent decisions?" Relief flooded Samuel's features. "I would like nothing more. We can take this as slowly as you need, Thea. I am not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, Sunday walks became the highlight of Thea's existence. Samuel rode into town every Sunday morning, attended church services sitting beside her, and then they would walk together along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood in Texas, his 3 older brothers who now ran the family ranch without him, his mother's love of singing, and his father's skill with horses. He learned about her life in Philadelphia, the books she had devoured as a child, her mother's quiet strength, and her father's fatal combination of optimism and impracticality. But they also talked about deeper things, about faith and doubt, hope and fear, dreams and disappointments. Thea found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had never voiced to another living soul, trusting Samuel with the vulnerable parts of herself she had kept carefully hidden. And he reciprocated, telling her about the loneliness of his drifting life, the way he sometimes woke in the middle of the night not knowing where he was, the fear that he would never find a place where he truly belonged. "I think that is why I kept moving," Samuel said one Sunday in late September as they sat on a fallen log beside the creek. The weather had finally begun to cool, making their walks more comfortable. "If I never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots, I could never be disappointed when that place failed to feel like home." "But that is a terrible way to live," Thea said, unconsciously leaning closer to him as they talked. "Always holding yourself apart, never letting yourself fully experience any place or person," says the woman who spent 3 years talking only to her reflection, Samuel pointed out gently. Thea had to laugh at that. "Fair point. I suppose we are both experts at protecting ourselves from potential hurt." "Were," Samuel corrected, his arm sliding around her shoulders in a gesture that had become familiar over their weeks of walking together. "Past tense, because I am not holding myself apart anymore, Thea. I am fully present right here, right now, with you." She turned to look at him, finding his face inches from hers. "And that does not frighten you?" "It terrifies me," Samuel admitted. "But staying afraid, staying alone, that frightens me more. You frightened me more, if I am being honest. You frightened me because you made me want things I had convinced myself I did not need. You made me want a home, a future, a reason to wake up in the same place every morning. Thea's breath caught as she read the intention in his eyes. Samuel, may I kiss you? He asked quietly. I have wanted to since that first day I found you talking to your reflection, but I wanted to wait until you were ready. Instead of answering with words, Thea closed the small distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing these new waters. But then Samuel's hand came up to cup her face, and she leaned into him more fully, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and hope and the promise of something real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I am in love with you, Thea Sullivan. I know it is probably too soon to say such things, but I cannot keep it inside any longer. I love your strength, your stubbornness, your vulnerability, your courage. I love the way you challenge me and the way you let me see past your walls. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. Tears spilled down Thea's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have loved you since you caught me talking to my reflection and did not laugh or make me feel foolish. You saw my loneliness and met it with your own, and somehow that made both of us less alone. Samuel kissed her again, longer this time, and when they finally broke apart, he was smiling wider than she had ever seen. Then marry me, Thea. I know we have only been courting for a few weeks, but I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me and we will build something together. I will take Morrison's offer of permanent employment. We will save our money and eventually buy our own piece of land. We will have a home, a real home together. Thea wanted to say yes immediately, but old fears held her back. What if I cannot give you children? What if I am barren like my mother was for the first 10 years of her marriage? Then we will have a life filled with other things, Samuel said without hesitation. Children would be a blessing, but they are not the measure of a good marriage or a happy life. What matters is that we face whatever comes together. What if I am not a good wife? What if I am too independent, too stubborn, too set in my solitary ways? Then I will love your independence and your stubbornness, Samuel promised. Thea, I am not asking you to become someone different. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, just with me beside you instead of your reflection. That broke through her final resistance, and Thea felt something tight in her chest finally release. Yes, she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Griffin. They were married 6 weeks later in the same small church where they had sat together that first Sunday. Thea wore a new dress that she had sewn herself, cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar that had cost far more than she should have spent. Samuel wore a new suit that Morrison had insisted on buying him as a wedding gift, looking uncomfortable but heartbreakingly handsome in the formal clothes. The entire town turned out for the wedding, it seemed, packing the small church to capacity. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, the older couple beaming with pride as if Thea were their own daughter. Morrison was there with his wife and 3 children, along with most of his ranch hands. Even some of the miners from the surrounding claims had cleaned up and come to town for the celebration. As Thea walked down the short aisle on Mr. Patterson's arm, her eyes locked on Samuel's face, and the love she saw there made her heart feel too large for her chest. When she reached the front of the church and the minister began the familiar words of the marriage ceremony, she realized that for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly happy. Do you, Samuel James Griffin, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The minister asked. I do, Samuel said firmly, his eyes never leaving Thea's face. And do you, Thea Marie Sullivan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Thea said, her voice clear and steady despite the tears on her cheeks. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Samuel leaned in to kiss her, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Thea laughed against Samuel's lips, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring that had been capped for far too long. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel's dining room, which Mrs. Patterson had decorated with whatever flowers could still be found blooming in late October. There was food and music, dancing and toasting, and more well wishes than Thea could properly acknowledge. She found herself passed from person to person, hugged and congratulated by people who had been little more than customers a few months ago, but who now felt like genuine friends. "You look radiant, my dear Mrs." Patterson said, embracing Thea warmly. "I have not seen you smile like this in all the time I have known you." "I did not know I could feel like this," Thea admitted. "I spent so long protecting myself from hurt that I forgot what joy felt like." "Well, you are going to have plenty of joy now," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Samuel is a good man, and the two of you are going to build a wonderful life together. I just know it." As the afternoon wore into evening, Samuel finally managed to pull Thea away from the well-wishers and out onto the hotel's back porch where they could have a moment of relative privacy. "Are you happy?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Deliriously," Thea said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you having second thoughts yet about marrying such a stubborn woman?" "Not even slightly," Samuel assured her. "Although I should warn you that Morrison has offered us the use of the small cabin on the eastern edge of his property. It is not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it would be ours. We would not have to live in the bunkhouse with the other hands." Thea pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. "Truly? A cabin of our own?" "It needs work," Samuel cautioned. "The roof leaks and the floor needs to be replaced in places, but Morrison said I could use ranch materials to fix it up, and some of the other hands have offered to help. We could have it livable within a few weeks." "A real home," Thea breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "After all these years of living in that tiny room above the store, we will have an actual home." "Our home," Samuel corrected. "The first of many if we work hard and save. But yes, a real home where we can start our life together." That night, as they lay together in the hotel's best room, which Mr. Patterson had insisted on giving them as a wedding gift, Thea traced patterns on Samuel's chest and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 3 months. "I used to talk to my reflection because I was so lonely I could not bear the silence," she said quietly, "and now I am lying beside my husband, planning our future together. It hardly seems real." Samuel caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "It is real, I promise you, and it is only going to get better from here." True to Samuel's word, the cabin was made livable within 3 weeks, thanks to the help of Morrison's ranch hands and several men from town who seemed to view the project as a community effort. The roof was patched, the floorboards replaced, a new window installed in the main room, and the old cook stove repaired and polished until it shone. Thea sewed curtains from fabric Mrs. Patterson gave her at cost, and Samuel built a proper bed frame to replace the rickety one they had inherited with the cabin. On the day they moved their meager possessions into the cabin, Thea stood in the doorway and felt tears prick her eyes. It was not much by most standards rough log walls, a packed earth floor in the lean-to kitchen, furniture that was mostly handmade from scrap lumber, but it was theirs, a place that belonged to them, where they could build a life together. "What do you think?" Samuel asked, coming to stand behind her and wrap his arms around her waist. "I think it is perfect," Thea said honestly. "I think this is exactly what I needed without even knowing I needed it." Their first months of marriage were filled with the kind of simple joys that Thea had never expected to experience. She continued working at Patterson's store 3 days a week, bringing in extra income while Samuel worked with Morrison's horses. On her days off, she would clean the cabin, tend the small garden they had planted, and work on sewing projects that would make their home more comfortable. But the best times were the evenings when Samuel would return from the ranch, dusty and tired, and she would have dinner waiting. They would eat together, talking about their days, and then sit outside in the cool evening air, watching the sun set over the Nevada desert while they made plans for their future. "Morrison says he has 3 more horses he wants me to work with," Samuel reported one evening in early January. Says if I can gentle them the way I did that bay gelding, he will pay me a bonus on top of my regular wages. That is wonderful, Thea said, leaning against his shoulder as they sat on the bench Samuel had built outside their front door. How much more do we need before we can start looking at land of our own? Samuel pulled a small notebook from his pocket, where he kept careful track of their finances. If we save everything I make from the bonus, plus half of what you are earning at the store, we should have enough for a down payment on a small piece of land by next fall. Maybe sooner, if we are careful. Our own land, Thea said dreamily. I can hardly imagine it. What will we do with it once we have it? Run some cattle, breed horses, maybe plant some crops if the land is suitable, Samuel said. Whatever it takes to make it productive and support us. But the important thing is that it will be ours, something we built together from nothing. As winter gave way to spring, their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thea found herself growing closer to the other ranch wives, women who had initially seemed standoffish but who now welcomed her into their circle. She learned to ride a horse despite her initial terror, so that she could accompany Samuel when he checked on Morrison's cattle in the far pastures. She learned to shoot a rifle, which Samuel insisted was necessary for anyone living on a remote ranch. And slowly, carefully, the wall she had built around her heart crumbled completely. She learned to share her fears with Samuel instead of holding them inside, learned to accept his comfort when nightmares about her father's death still occasionally haunted her sleep. She learned that depending on someone did not make her weak, and that being part of a partnership did not mean losing herself. In late May, Thea realized that her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but when a second month passed with no sign of bleeding, she could no longer deny the possibility. The morning sickness that began soon after confirmed what she had suspected. She waited until after dinner one evening to tell Samuel, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and terror. They were sitting outside as had become their habit, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice sounding strange even to her own ears. Something important. Samuel immediately sat up straighter, concern crossing his face. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine, Thea assured him quickly. Better than fine, actually. Samuel, I am going to have a baby. For a moment, Samuel simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Morrison's main house. He swept Thea up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. A baby, he kept repeating. We are going to have a baby. Thea, this is incredible. When he finally set her down, Thea grabbed his arms to steady herself, her own smile fading slightly. I am terrified, she admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother? What if... Samuel silenced her fears with a gentle kiss. You are going to be an amazing mother, and I am going to be right beside you every step of the way. We will figure this out together, just like we have figured out everything else. But what about the land? Thea asked, where we were saving to buy our own place. A baby will be expensive. The land can wait, Samuel said firmly. Our family comes first. We will save what we can, but we are not going to scrimp on things the baby needs just to buy property a few months sooner. Do you understand? Thea nodded, relief washing through her. She had been afraid he might resent the delay in their plans, but she should have known better. Samuel had proven time and again that his priorities were exactly where they should be. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Thea's fears. Mrs. Morrison, who had 3 children of her own, took Thea under her wing and provided advice and reassurance. The ranch wives rallied around, offering hand-me-down baby clothes and giving Thea tips for managing the various discomforts of pregnancy. Even Mrs. Patterson made the journey out to the ranch several times, bringing fabric for baby gowns and tiny blankets. Samuel was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted Thea stop working at the store after her 5th month, worried that standing for long hours was too taxing. He brought home special treats whenever he went into town, trying to satisfy her changing cravings. He talked to her growing belly every night, telling their unborn child stories about his childhood and promising to teach their son or daughter to ride horses and rope cattle. "What if we have a daughter?" Thea asked one evening, amused by his enthusiastic plans. "Are you going to teach her to rope cattle too?" "Absolutely," Samuel said without hesitation. "Any child of ours is going to know how to ride and work a ranch, regardless of whether they are a boy or girl. Besides, some of the best cowboys I have known were actually cowgirls who could outride and outrope any man." Thea smiled and ran her hands over her swollen belly. "I hope our children have your confidence and optimism. I am afraid they might inherit my tendency toward worry instead." "Then we will balance each other out," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You will teach them to be practical and thoughtful, and I will teach them to take chances and believe in possibilities. Between the two of us, they will turn out just fine." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1885, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected during a winter storm that made it impossible to fetch the doctor from town. Mrs. Morrison and 2 of the ranch wives attended the birth, coaching Thea through the long hours of labor while Samuel paced anxiously outside the cabin. When Mrs. Morrison finally opened the door and invited him inside, Samuel rushed to Thea's side to find her pale and exhausted but smiling as she cradled a tiny red-faced infant against her chest. "We have a son," she said softly, her eyes shining with tears. "Samuel, we have a son." Samuel knelt beside the bed, his own eyes wet as he looked at the impossibly small person they had created together. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Jacob Thomas Griffin. Jacob after Samuel's father and Thomas after Thea's. The baby was healthy and loud, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. In those first overwhelming weeks after his birth, Thea found herself grateful beyond measure for Samuel's steady presence. He took over the household chores without complaint, changed diapers with surprising competence, and walked the floor with Jacob during the endless nights when the baby refused to sleep. "I could not do this without you," Thea told him one morning after a particularly difficult night. She was exhausted and milk-stained, her hair a disaster, and her eyes gritty from lack of sleep, but Samuel looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Yes, you could," he said gently. "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for, Thea, but you do not have to do it alone. That is the whole point of being partners." As spring arrived and Jacob grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling infant, life began to settle into a new normal. Thea marveled at how much love she felt for this small person, how fierce her desire was to protect him and give him everything good in the world. She understood her own mother better now, understood the sacrifices she had made, and the quiet strength it took to raise a child in difficult circumstances. By the time Jacob was 6 months old, Samuel approached Thea with news he had been sitting on for several days. "Morrison wants to retire," he said. "His rheumatism is getting worse, and he is finding it harder to manage the ranch. He has made me an offer to buy the place, including the land, the cattle, the horses, everything." Thea's eyes went wide. "Buy the ranch? Samuel, we could never afford something like that." "He is willing to carry the note himself, Samuel explained. "We would make monthly payments directly to him instead of going through a bank. He says he trusts me to run the place properly and make the payments on time. It would mean a lot of debt, but it would also mean owning a working ranch instead of just a small piece of undeveloped land." "That is a huge responsibility," Thea said slowly, her mind racing through all the implications. "What if something goes wrong? What if we cannot make the payments?" "Then we would be no worse off than we are now," Samuel pointed out. "But think about it, Thea. This would be Jacob's inheritance. This would be the home and the stability you wanted, the legacy we could pass down to our children and their children." Thea looked around their small cabin, then out the window at the ranch where Samuel had worked for the past year and a half. She thought about Jacob sleeping peacefully in the cradle Samuel had built, about the life they had constructed from nothing, about all the fears she had overcome to get to this point. "If you think we can do this, then I trust you," she said finally. "But Samuel, you have to promise me something. If it ever becomes too much, if we are ever risking our family's security, you have to be willing to walk away. The ranch is not worth destroying what we have built together." Samuel pulled her close. Jacob nestled between them. "I promise. Our family comes first always. The ranch is just property. You and Jacob, you are my real home." They signed the papers with Morrison the following week, committing themselves to 20 years of monthly payments that would eventually make them the owners of one of the most productive ranches in the region. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, a leap of faith that would have been unthinkable to Thea just 2 years earlier. But she was not the same woman who had stood talking to her reflection, convinced that solitude was safer than risking connection. She had learned that love was worth the risk of potential loss, that building something with another person was infinitely more rewarding than protecting herself from possible pain. She had learned that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, and that having a partner meant multiplying her strengths rather than dividing them. The first year of owning the ranch was the hardest thing either of them had ever done. There were late frosts that killed early calves, broken fences that let cattle wander onto neighboring property, horses that fell sick despite their best care. There were months when they barely made the payment to Morrison, when they ate beans and cornbread because that was all they could afford after buying feed for the animals. But there were also victories. The first calf born under their ownership, healthy and strong, the wild Mustang Samuel, gentled into the finest cutting horse in the county. The day Thea successfully negotiated a contract to supply beef to the mining camps, getting a far better price than Samuel had expected. Slowly, painfully, they began to turn a profit. Jacob grew into a toddler, then a bright, curious 4-year-old who followed his father everywhere and peppered both parents with endless questions. Thea had worried during her pregnancy that she might become like her mother, worn down and diminished by the demands of child-rearing. Instead, she found that motherhood had expanded her in unexpected ways, making her braver and more determined to build something lasting. In the spring of 1888, Thea gave birth to twin daughters, Emily Rose and Sarah Jane. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, but both babies were healthy despite being smaller than Jacob had been. Samuel was besotted with his daughters, insisting that they would grow up to be as capable as any son when it came to running the ranch. 3 children. Thea marveled one evening as she nursed the twins while Samuel read to Jacob from a well-worn storybook. "When I was standing by that water trough talking to my reflection, I could never have imagined this life. I could never have imagined being this happy." "Do you still talk to your reflection?" Samuel asked with a gentle smile. Thea shook her head. "I have not done that in years. I do not need to anymore because I'm never really alone. I have you, I have our children, I have a home that is truly ours. I have everything I ever wanted without even realizing I wanted it." "No regrets then?" Samuel pressed. "No lingering wishes that you had chosen a different path?" "Not a single one," Thea said firmly. "This life is hard sometimes, harder than I could have predicted, but it is also so much richer and fuller than anything I could have built alone. You gave me that, Samuel. You saw past my walls and my fears and convinced me that love was worth the risk." Samuel set aside the storybook, leaving Jacob to examine the pictures on his own, and crossed to where Thea sat with their daughters. He knelt beside the rocking chair and carefully embraced all 3 of his girls at once. "You gave me just as much," he said quietly. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting, a place that finally feels like home. You gave me a family and a future. Everything good in my life started the day I heard you talking to your reflection." The years passed in the way years do when life is full and busy. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and the love between Samuel and Thea deepened with each passing season. They had their share of troubles, of course, a drought in 1890 that forced them to sell off half the herd, Jacob breaking his arm falling from a horse when he was 8, a bout of scarlet fever that swept through the region and left all 3 children seriously ill for terrifying weeks. But they weathered each crisis together, their partnership stronger for having survived the challenges. Samuel proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, spending hours teaching his children to ride and work the ranch while also encouraging their schooling and individual interests. Thea discovered she had a talent for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and negotiating contracts that kept them profitable even in lean years. By 1895, they had paid off half the ranch's purchase price, putting them well ahead of Morrison's original schedule. The old rancher had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving clear instructions that the Griffins were to continue the payment plan with his estate. His children, none of whom had any interest in ranching, were happy to honor his wishes. On a warm evening in July, as they approached their 10th wedding anniversary, Thea and Samuel sat on the porch of their house, no longer the tiny cabin, but a proper ranch house they had built 3 years earlier, and watched their children play in the yard. Jacob, now 10, was teaching his 7-year-old sisters to rope a practice post, all 3 children laughing at each attempt. "I have been thinking," Thea said, leaning against Samuel's shoulder in the comfortable way of long married couples, "about that day you found me talking to my reflection." "I think about that day often," Samuel admitted. "It changed everything for both of us." "I was so lonely then," Thea continued, "so convinced that I had to protect myself from hurt by keeping everyone at a distance. I thought I was being strong and independent, but really I was just scared and alone." "You were both," Samuel said gently. "Strong and scared, independent and lonely. Those things are not mutually exclusive." Thea smiled at his words. "I suppose you are right, but the point I am trying to make is that I am grateful you did not take no for an answer. I am grateful you saw past my prickly exterior and recognized that what I really needed was someone who would not let me push them away." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Deciding to stay in Hawthorne, taking the job with Morrison, pursuing you despite your very clear reservations, all of it led to this, to the life we have built together." "Do you ever miss it?" Thea asked. "The drifting? The freedom to go wherever you wanted without responsibilities tying you down?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted, "when there was just me and my horse and the open trail. But I would not trade what I have now for anything. This ranch, our family, the legacy we are building for our children, this is so much better than anything I had before. You are so much better than the lonely existence I was living." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple. Jacob finally managed to rope the post successfully, and his sisters cheered for him before demanding he teach them his technique. "I want to tell you something," Thea said suddenly. "Something I should have said years ago but never quite found the words for." Samuel turned to look at her, curiosity and a hint of concern in his expression. "What is it?" "Thank you," Thea said simply. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else, including myself. Thank you for believing I was worth pursuing even when I tried to convince you otherwise. Thank you for building this life with me, for being the kind of husband and father I did not know existed. Thank you for making me brave enough to stop talking to my reflection and start living in the real world instead." Samuel's eyes grew suspiciously bright, and he pulled Thea closer against his side. "You do not need to thank me for loving you." "Thea, it was the easiest thing I have ever done. You made yourself worthy of love long before I came along. I just had the good fortune to be the one who got to show you that." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and their children's laughter filled the evening air, Thea reflected on how far she had come from that lonely young woman standing by a water trough. She had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined, filled with love and laughter, hard work, and deep satisfaction. She had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that depending on someone did not diminish her independence, and that the right partnership could make both people stronger than they ever could be alone. The ranch continued to thrive as the children grew into capable young adults. Jacob proved to have his father's gift with horses, developing a reputation throughout the region for his ability to gentle even the wildest mustangs. The twins, inseparable as always, showed more interest in the business side of ranching, helping their mother with the accounts and contracts from an early age. In 1902, when Thea and Samuel had been married for 17 years, they made the final payment on the ranch. Morrison's children signed over the deed, officially making the property entirely theirs, free and clear. It was one of the proudest moments of their lives, exceeded only by their wedding day and the births of their children. "We did it," Thea said, holding the deed in trembling hands. "We actually did it, Samuel. We own this land outright." Samuel wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both stared at the legal document that represented so many years of hard work and sacrifice. "We did it together. Everything we have, everything we have built, we did it as partners." That evening they gathered the whole family together for a special dinner. Jacob was 21 now, already talking about expanding the ranch's horse breeding program. The twins at 19 were fielding serious courtship offers from several local young men, though neither seemed in any hurry to marry. "I want to make a toast," Samuel said, standing at the head of the table with a glass of elderberry wine. "To your mother, who took a chance on a drifting cowboy and helped him build something more valuable than he ever could have created alone. To all of you for being the best children any parent could ask for, and to this ranch, which is not just land and cattle and horses, but the physical embodiment of what two people can accomplish when they refuse to let fear keep them apart." "Hear, hear," Jacob said, raising his own glass. The twins echoed the sentiment, and they all drank to the ranch's success and the family's bright future. After dinner, Thea and Samuel walked out to the place where the old water trough still stood, replaced now with a newer model but still occupying the same spot where their story had begun. The evening was cool, a welcome relief from the summer heat, and the stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky. "Do you remember what I said?" Thea asked, looking at her reflection in the water. "That day you first heard me?" "Sometimes I am my only company," Samuel quoted. "How could I forget?" Those words broke my heart and changed my life all at once. Thea smiled at her reflection, but this time, instead of speaking to it, she turned to face her husband. "I am never alone anymore. Even when you are out working the far pastures or traveling to sell horses, even when the children are off living their own lives, I am never truly alone. Because you taught me that real connection does not require constant physical presence. It is built on trust and commitment and the deep knowledge that someone sees you, truly sees you, and loves you anyway." "I do see you," Samuel said softly, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "I see your strength and your vulnerability, your practicality and your dreams, your fears and your courage. I see all of you, Thea, and I love every single part." They kissed under the stars, 20 years of love and partnership, and shared history in that single gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Thea said, taking his hand. "Let's go home." They walked back to the ranch house together, two people who had been lucky enough to find each other at exactly the right moment, brave enough to take a chance on love despite their fears, and wise enough to build something lasting from that initial connection. Behind them, the water trough sat silent and still, its surface reflecting stars instead of a lonely woman seeking comfort in her own image. That woman was gone, transformed into someone richer and fuller and infinitely more complete. Not because she had found a husband to complete her, but because she had found the courage to let someone in, to build something together, to trust that love was worth the risk of potential loss. And in the end, that made all the difference. The years continued to unfold with a rhythm of ranch life, marked by seasons of calving and branding, planting and harvest. Jacob eventually married a capable young woman named Martha who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. They built their own house on the eastern portion of the property and began raising their own family, adding 3 grandchildren to Samuel and Thea's growing legacy. The twins proved more particular in their choices. Emily eventually married a school teacher who came to Hawthorne from California, a gentleman who supported her continued involvement in the ranch's business operations. Sarah surprised everyone by falling in love with a widow rancher from Oregon who had 3 children of his own. She moved north with him but returned frequently, always eager to consult with her mother about business decisions and share news of her expanded family. As Samuel and Thea moved into their 50s and then their 60s, they gradually turned over more of the daily operations to Jacob and Martha, while remaining involved in major decisions. They had worked too hard building the ranch to completely step away, but they also recognized the importance of allowing the next generation to put their own stamp on the operation. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their children threw them a celebration that brought together people from all over the region. Former ranch hands who had worked for them over the years, business associates, neighbors, friends from church, and their ever-growing collection of grandchildren all gathered to honor the couple who had built something remarkable from nothing but determination and love. "I cannot believe it has been 30 years, Thea said to Samuel as they stood together accepting congratulations. Her auburn hair was now more silver than red, and lines of laughter and sun exposure marked her face. But Samuel thought she had never been more beautiful. "Best 30 years of my life," Samuel replied, his own hair completely gray now, and his body showing the effects of decades of hard physical labor. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even the hard parts?" Thea teased. "The drought years and the sick animals and the endless worry about making payments?" "Especially the hard parts," Samuel said seriously, "because those are what proved we could survive anything as long as we faced it together. Those are what made the good times feel even better by contrast." That evening, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, Thea and Samuel took one last walk out to the old water trough. It was a pilgrimage they made on every anniversary, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. "I used to think my reflection was my only companion," Thea said, looking down at the weathered face the water showed her. "Now I can barely remember what that loneliness felt like. It seems like something that happened to a different person in a different lifetime." "In some ways it was a different person," Samuel observed. "We have both changed so much over the years. The people we are now barely resemble who we were when we first met." "But the core is the same," Thea argued gently. "You are still the kind, persistent man who would not let me push him away. I am still the cautious, practical woman who needed someone to show her that love was worth the risk. We have just become more fully ourselves through the years we have shared." Samuel pulled her close, and they stood together in the gathering darkness, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast Nevada sky. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren laughing as Jacob and Martha got them settled for the night in the main house. The sound of family, of continuity, of the legacy they had built together. "I love you, Thea Griffin," Samuel said, using her married name with the same satisfaction he always felt. "I have loved you since the day I found you talking to your reflection, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Thea replied, her voice steady and sure. "You gave me everything I was too frightened to ask for: a home, a family, a partnership that has sustained me through every challenge. You taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be vulnerable with another person." They stood there for a long time, two people who had beaten the odds and built something beautiful from unlikely beginnings. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with warm lamplight, filled with the sounds and presence of the family they had created together. Ahead of them lay whatever years remained, to be faced together as they had faced everything else. Eventually, they turned away from the water trough and walked hand in hand back toward the house. Thea glanced back once at the spot where her life had changed so dramatically, where a lonely woman talking to her reflection had been overheard by exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. She smiled at the memory, grateful beyond measure for that chance encounter and everything that had flowed from it. Then she faced forward again, toward the home and family and life she had built with Samuel, and did not look back again. There was no need to. Her reflection had served its purpose all those years ago, providing company when she had no other. But now she had Samuel, their children, their grandchildren, and a lifetime of shared memories. She had everything she needed, and more than she had ever dared to dream. As they reached the porch steps, Samuel paused and turned to face her one more time. "Happy anniversary, my love." "Happy anniversary," Thea replied, rising on her toes to kiss him despite the stiffness in her joints that spoke of advancing age. "Here is to 30 more years." "To 30 more years," Samuel agreed, though they both knew that such a span was unlikely at their age. But it did not matter how many years remained. What mattered was that they would face those years together, just as they had faced everything else since that fateful August day in 1883, when a drifting cowboy heard a lonely woman talking to her reflection and decided to take a chance on love. They climbed the steps together and entered their home, closing the door on the cool evening air and the memories of who they used to be. Inside waited warmth and light and family, the tangible results of two people brave enough to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, partnership over solitude. And somewhere in the Nevada night, the water in the old trough rippled gently in the breeze, reflecting stars and moonlight, but no longer reflecting the face of a lonely woman seeking comfort in her own image. That woman was gone, transformed into someone rich and full and deeply loved. In her place was a wife, mother, grandmother, rancher, and partner who had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of letting someone see past our carefully constructed walls and into the vulnerable heart beneath. That was how their story ended, or perhaps more accurately, how it continued beyond the scope of these pages, because love stories do not really end when the words stop. They continue in the lives built together. The children raised, the grandchildren doted upon, the land worked and improved and passed down to new generations. They continue in the 1,000 small kindnesses exchanged between long married partners, in shared memories and inside jokes, in the comfortable silence of people who know each other so well that words are often unnecessary. Samuel and Thea's love story continued for many more years, through joy and sorrow, triumph and setback, health and illness. They continued it until Samuel passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, his hand clasped in Thea's even at the end. And Thea continued it in her own way for the 5 years she outlived him, keeping his memory alive through stories told to great-grandchildren and maintaining the ranch they had built together with fierce determination. When she finally joined him, on a spring morning in 1924, with the Nevada sun streaming through her window and her family surrounding her bed, her last words were about that long-ago August day when everything changed. "Tell them," she whispered to her gathered children and grandchildren, "tell them that I was standing by the water trough talking to my reflection because I thought I had no other company. Tell them that your father heard me and decided I was worth knowing, worth loving. Tell them that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us as we really are. Tell them that love is always worth the risk." Then she closed her eyes and slipped away, a soft smile on her weathered face, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a life rich with love and meaning. The lonely young woman who once found comfort in her own reflection had become someone who found comfort in the arms of her beloved, in the presence of her children, in the legacy they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and a chance encounter on a hot summer day. And that truly was the end of their story, and simultaneously the beginning of countless others, as their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons learned from two people brave enough to choose love over loneliness, connection over isolation, partnership over independence. The ranch they built together still stands to this day, worked by their descendants who remember the story of how it all began with a cowboy who heard a woman talking to her reflection and saw past her loneliness to the person she could become with someone brave enough to stand beside her.